connect a region of over 600 mil bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's program. Japan's government is urging Hokkaido residents to take shelter this morning after a North Korean missile launch, but local officials later said the missile would not land near the northern region. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations strongly condemned the recent airstrikes in Myanmar, in which dozens of people were reportedly killed. And hazardous pollution levels in northern Thailand have left the historic city of Chiang Mai choking under thick smog, with locals worried about the impact on tourism and their health. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken in the Philippines said late Tuesday that Russia's detainment of a Wall Street Journal reporter sends a warning about even setting foot in that country. And we have an update on the breaking news out of Japan, where people in Hokkaido have been told to take shelter and evacuate following concerns that North Korea fired a missile that could have landed near the island. Evacuate immediately, the government said in an initial warning, telling residents of Hokkaido to take shelter in a building or underground. Japan's Coast Guard said the missile was believed to have landed. It said authorities announced through the 3 alert system at 07:55 a.m. and through the EMNet system at 07:56 a.m. that a missile launched by North Korea could fall in the Hokkaido region. But not long after, Asakihawa City in Hokkaido tweeted that there was no longer any concern of danger. Authorities then verified the information and confirmed there was no possibility that the missile would fall in the Hokkaido region. On Monday, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un attended a meeting of the Central Military Commission to discuss ways to cope with the escalating moves of the U.S. imperialists and the South Korean puppet traders to unleash a war of aggression. That is according to Pyongyang's Korean Central News Agency. Earlier this year, Kim also ordered the military to intensify drills to prepare for a real war. In response, Washington and Seoul have intensified defense cooperation, staging joint military exercises with advanced stealth jets and high-profile U.S. strategic assets. South Korea on Tuesday also accused North Korea of being, quote, irresponsible after Pyongyang cut hotline contact with Seoul last week. For 5 days, South Korean Unification Minister Kwon Yang-se told reporters that North Korea has not answered the twice daily calls made through a military hotline and an inter-Korea liaison channel. The links were cut a day after Seoul accused Pyongyang of continued unauthorized use of a joint industrial complex in the North Korean city of Kaesong. South Korea said North Korea had refused to accept its notice to cease activity at the factory, which was once a symbol of reconciliation. Seoul pulled out of the venture in 2016 following a North Korean nuclear test, saying the complex was helping to fund Pyongyang's weapons programs. In tonight's other news, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations strongly condemned the recent airstrikes in Myanmar, in which dozens of people were reportedly killed. That according to a statement published on today by Indonesia, the current ASEAN chair. All forms of violence must end immediately, particularly the use of force against civilians, added the statement. A statement issued by the ASEAN chair does not necessarily indicate the agreement of all member states. The official death toll from Tuesday morning's strike on the remote Kanbalu township in Myanmar's central Sagaing region remains unclear, though at least 100 fatalities have been reported by the BBC, the Irrawaddy and Radio Free Asia said. The junta confirmed Wednesday it had launched limited airstrikes after receiving a tip-off from locals about an event marking the opening of a local defense force office connected to the military government's opponents. The attack drew swift condemnation from the UN and Western powers.
The Secretary General condemns all forms of violence and reaffirms the primacy of protection of civilians in accordance with international humanitarian law, reiterates his call for the military to end the campaign of violence against the Myanmar population throughout the country, in line with Resolution 2669. I mean, this is just a latest example of just the horrific toll on civilians.
Indonesia, Southeast Asia's biggest economy, is serving as 2023's chair of ASEAN and will host the 10-member bloc's annual leaders' meetings in May and September. Jakarta's chairmanship of the bloc had raised hopes ASEAN could push for a peaceful solution in Myanmar, using Indonesia's weight as a regional economic power and its diplomatic experience. The junta remains an ASEAN member, but has been barred from top-level summits over its failure to implement the peace plan. In tonight's other news, China's President Xi Jinping called on the country's armed forces to strengthen military training oriented towards actual combat. That, according to state media reporting this on Wednesday after Beijing conducted military drills intended to intimidate Taiwan. President Xi's comments made on a naval inspection trip on Tuesday come amid heightened tension in the region after the show of force by Beijing, which sees self-ruled Taiwan as its territory. China on Monday concluded 3 days of military drills launched in response to a visit last week by Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen to the U.S., where she met a bipartisan group of lawmakers and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. President Xi told the People's Liberation Army Southern Theater Command Navy that the military must, quote, resolutely defend China's territorial sovereignty and maritime interests and strive to protect overall peripheral stability. That, according to the state broadcaster CCTV. Beijing has also criticized the plan for U.S. forces to use the growing number of bases in the Philippines, including one near Taiwan. The U.S. and the Philippines are holding their largest ever joint military drills this week, with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken committing to standing with the Philippines against any intimidation or coercion, including in the South China Sea.
Secretary Austin and I also reaffirmed the United States' unwavering commitment to standing with the Philippines against any intimidation or coercion, including in the South China Sea, and to preserving a region that's governed by international law, where goods and ideas and people can move freely.
President Xi Tuesday said that China must be innovative in its concept and methods of combat. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin hosted officer in charge of the Philippines National Defense Carlito Galvez at the Pentagon as the allies launched their largest joint exercises in the face of Beijing's growing assertiveness in the South China Sea.
This is an historic moment for our alliance as we take critical steps together to deepen our ties and strengthen peace and stability in the region. We share a vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific, one grounded in transparency, freedom of navigation, the rule of law, respect for sovereignty, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. Now, those principles have faced growing challenges lately. We've seen a troubling increase in coercion and dangerous operational behavior, including in the South China Sea. And we remain deeply committed to our alliance obligations. And as we've made abundantly clear, the Mutual Defense Treaty applies to armed attacks on either of our armed forces, our public vessels, or aircraft anywhere in the South China Sea.
Meanwhile, the U.S. is calling on Russia to release the Wall Street Journal reporter it says is being wrongfully detained in Russia. It's been 2 weeks since Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich was imprisoned in Russia, falsely charged with espionage. And he is believed to be the first foreign journalist held for spying in post-Soviet Russia. And his arrest is expected to escalate the Kremlin's confrontation with the West amid Moscow's assault on Ukraine. The U.S. Embassy diplomat there said they still have not been able to see him, despite Russia's commitment to grant diplomatic access to U.S. prisoners within 4 days. On his way to Ireland on Tuesday, President Biden spoke to the journalist's family, and he declared Gershkovich's imprisonment illegal after the State Department classified the reporter as wrongfully detained.
We missed calls. I called him yesterday. We missed calls. I'm going to try him from the plane.
You're trying from the plane?
Yeah.
That's with his family?
Yes.
Anything you can say about his case?
Well, you know, we're making it real clear that it's totally illegal what's happening, and we declared it so, changes the dynamic.
The 31-year-old journalist's detention on charges that carry a maximum penalty of 20 years behind bars is also a serious escalation in the Kremlin's sweeping crackdown on the media that'll make the negotiation even tougher.
My good friend and colleague Evan Gershkovich, you found him wrongfully detained, and so wanted to ask when your staff will be able to get consular access to him in Russia. What's taking so long there? And will there be any leverage that you can exert? Is there any leverage that you can exert to get Russia to provide that access?
I think Russia not following through on meeting its obligations to consular access, never mind the practice of detaining people arbitrarily for political purposes, is going to do even more damage to Russia's standing around the world, standing that has been in free fall, particularly since its reinvasion of Ukraine last year. And I think it sends a very strong message to people around the world to beware of even setting foot there, lest they be arbitrarily detained, and in the context of being arbitrarily detained, not even having access for the diplomats who are there to look out for their interests. To do that, I can simply tell you that we are engaged every single day in pressing for that access, as well as pressing for Evan's release.
In other news, global debt levels are rising faster than predicted, with the bulk of future boosts coming from China and the U.S., according to the IMF. Take a look.
Suspended fiscal rules. Now, most of these countries plan to go back to rules, often after some rethinking. However, despite having come halfway down from unprecedented levels reached in 2020, global public debt is more elevated and projected to grow faster than foreseen before the pandemic. Global trends are shaped by some large, advanced, and emerging market economies. Brazil, China, Japan, South Africa, Turkey, the UK, and the US are all projected to see increases in public debt ratios in excess of 5 percentage points of GDP over 2023 to 2028, with the two largest economies contributing most to the increase.
65% of countries outside that main group are in debt distress already or at high risk of debt distress, according to Gaspar. The fund is urging action to reduce or forgive debt for those countries.
The IMF has as one of its priorities to contribute to ease those financing constraints, and it's calling on the global community and the community of creditors to act. One important aspect is to act on timely debt resolution. The G20 has the common framework to resolve these issues. It's important to have it working more expeditiously than up to now. And the IMF, the World Bank, and the India presidency of the G20 have put in place a global sovereign roundtable that is meant to help bringing together important stakeholders in this direction.
But for those countries with immediate needs, persistently high inflation and the Russian invasion of Ukraine have caused problems in financing.
More than 130 million people in Africa alone are living under extreme food insecurity. So what we recommend in these perspectives, yes, you need a tight fiscal policy for the reasons have been already mentioned. One is obviously the containing inflation, but the other is these heightened debt sustainability concerns and the lack of access to financing under these much tighter global financial conditions, especially for low-income countries.
The IMF also announced in a press briefing that fiscal policy is returning to normal 3 years since the outbreak of the COVID pandemic. After providing extraordinary support simultaneously in 2020, both monetary and fiscal policy tightened in nearly three-quarters of countries in 2022 amid high inflation and the expiration of pandemic-related spending measures. Now, these sizable reductions in debts and deficits stem in large part from atypical growth and inflation dynamics in 2022. Most countries experienced revenue surprises amounting to 3.1% of GDP on average for advanced economies and 2.5% for emerging market and developing economies, with particularly large revenue windfalls in oil exporters. Assistant.
Policy advice has to be adapted to country-specific circumstances. There are many relevant differences. Let's look at global public debt trends. 2/3 of countries are expected to see reductions in their public debt ratios, but global debt is expected to go up. Why? That is due to the behavior of some large, advanced and emerging market economies. Economies like Brazil, China, Japan, Turkey, South Africa, the United States, and United Kingdom.
Under current projections, the envisaged gradual and moderate fiscal tightening will not be sufficient to prevent public debt ratios from resuming an upward trend, as nominal GDP slows, driven by advanced economies and some large emerging market economies. Again, Assistant.
When it comes to policy recommendations, the Fiscal Monitor makes a strong case for fiscal tightening. The main reason is that by tightening fiscal policy, there is support for monetary policy, and the required increase in monetary policy rates is less. That also contributes to financial stability, helps reduce public finance risks, and to build buffers which are important to allow authorities to respond to adverse economic or financial shocks.
Now, beyond the near-term imperative to safeguard poorer households, long-standing challenges, including the climate agenda and population aging, have likewise become more pressing. That's Assistant again.
The most important global policy challenge right now is to avoid catastrophic climate change by accelerating green transformation. Any delays will only magnify costs. We urgently need individual action at country level, but also global collective action to limit temperature increases to tolerable levels.
Back here in the country, Pagasa said tropical depression Amang weakened into a low-pressure area or LPA this morning. Let's listen in.
Bagyong Amang po ay tuloy na pong humina at naging ganap na low-pressure area. Pero magtatagal pa itong low-pressure area, maaari pong umabot pa bukas itong low-pressure area hanggang ito'y malusaw. Pangabat ng low-pressure area, inaasahan pa rin tayo mga pag-ulan, lalo po sa bahagi ng Luzon, kasama ang Metro Manila.
Now, in this latest advisory issued at 11 a.m., Pagasa said the LPA, formerly Amang, was last located over the coastal waters of Polillo Island. Now, it's forecast to move generally northwestward or west-northwestward towards Polillo Islands and northern mainland Quezon. The LPA will still bring scattered rain showers and thunderstorms over most areas of Central Luzon, Metro Manila, and Calabarzon. A strong tropical cyclone hurtled towards Western Australia today, triggering evacuations as authorities warned violent winds could toss caravans, tear down trees, and turn debris into missiles. Take a look.
Category 4 cyclone will produce wind gusts in excess of 200 kilometres an hour. That's very dangerous. It'll produce a lot of damage to trees and vegetation. It could destroy caravans.
Going to Broome, it's full on. We have to leave the station and pack everything up.
For the most part, I'm pretty confident we've got at least 7 days worth of supplies here, so we should be all right.
Now, tropical cyclone Elsa gathered strength over the Indian Ocean with one of the world's major iron ore shipping hubs, Port Hedland, cleared of vessels in preparation. Forecasters are predicting the Category 4 storm could bring gusts of up to 270 kilometers per hour, making it one of the most powerful cyclones to hit the state in a decade. The storm was expected to make landfall on Thursday evening on Friday morning, landing somewhere between the coastal towns of Broome and Port Hedland, about 17 hours drive north of Perth. The region is home to iron ore mines, gold mines, sprawling cattle ranches, and a number of Aboriginal communities. The state's Department of Fire and Emergency Services said that it cannot stress enough how extreme these conditions will be for those in the area. Peter Carter, the mayor of Port Hedland, said the destructive winds could turn flying pieces of debris into missiles in the air. Australian researchers have repeatedly warned that climate change amplifies the risk of natural disasters such as bushfires, floods, and cyclones. Hazardous pollution levels in northern Thailand have left the historic city of Chiang Mai choking under thick smog, with locals worried about the impact on tourism and their health. Let's listen in.
ภาพที่เคยเจอก่อนหน้านี้ที่ผมเคยมานะครับมันยังสวยกว่านี้มันยังสดใสกว่านี้แต่พอมาเจอในรอบนี้นะครับที่ผมมารอบนี้รู้สึกว่ามุมมองที่เคยเห็นหลายๆอย่างเนี่ยพอมีหมอกเข้ามาพอมีฝุ่นเข้ามาตรงนี้นะครับมันรู้สึกว่าความสวยงามมันลดลงมันทำให้ผมรู้สึกว่ามันเป็นตัวเลือกหนึ่งว่าจะมาอีกครั้งหนึ่งไหมถ้าหากว่ายังมีฝุ่นละอองอยู่แบบนี้ครับ
บางวันออกมาก็อย่างที่เห็นนะก็คือเรามองแทบไม่เห็นถนนเลยไม่ใช่หมอกนะฝุ่นคือมันมัวไปหมดเลยแล้วก็ผลกระทบมันก็เยอะขึ้นของเรามันหลายด้านทั้งสุขภาพเราแล้วก็พวกนักท่องเที่ยวก็จะหาย
The sun was really bright red because of the smoke in the sky. We thought it was quite strange and very hazy, just very hazy. And you couldn't see much further than, a few fields away.
As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angela. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.